This podcast is sponsored by Ramp.
I can't sleep.
What is it now?
It's the company. It's chaos.
What's chaos now?
The numbers, the expenses, the books. What if we get audited?
No one's gonna audit you at 3 a.m. Go to sleep.
I can't sleep.
You could if you used Ramp.
Who said that?
I don't care because they're right. Go to sleep and sign up for Ramp in the morning, Jerry.
Ramp is the corporate card that handles all your tedious financial operations automatically, integrates directly with your ERP, and gives you complete control over every transaction. Ramp gives you everything you need for bulletproof books and a better night's sleep.
Wow, that is exactly what my company needs.
Yes, and exactly what I also need. Go to sleep, Jerry.
Upgrade to Ramp for free today and get $250 at ramp.com. That's ramp.com, ramp.com.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
Are you fascinated by unexplainable crimes, conspiracies, and fringe culture? Well, step into the crawl space. From tales of survival and deepfakes to synchronicities and cryptozoology, Crawl Space is a podcast that brings you weekly stories of the mysterious, harrowing, and bizarre. Search Crawl Space wherever you listen to podcasts. Crawl Space, where crime meets culture.
You're listening to Campus Killings, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, and Citizen Detective. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hello, Megan, and hello, listeners. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to give you an update on a case from last season where we covered the murder of Professor Thomas Mexner by one of his students, Murad Dervish. If you haven't listened to episode 24, we hope that you'll go back and give it a listen. At the time of our recording, Dervish had not yet gone to trial, but his sentencing was just completed on June 24th of 2024. Here is where he received a life sentence for the murder of Professor Mexner after a jury found him guilty in May of 2024. He was also given 7 years for aggravated assault and 3 years for burglary to run concurrently with his life sentence. All right, now on to today's episode, which will cover a similar topic to the Thomas Mexner case. Today, we're back at Stanford University. We first visited Stanford last season for Jane Stanford's murder at the college's inception. But today's case takes us to 1978, and this one was a listener request, so a big shout out to Linda A. I think we'll have a lot to discuss on the length of the sentence and the victim impact in this episode. So thank you, Linda, for sending this case our way.
I think we're lucky, too. We've been able to cover a couple of listener requests this season, which is very nice, and we appreciate the suggestions.
Yes, they're always really good cases.
Yep.
Before we start, I just want to make a quick note that unfortunately there was not much information on today's victim, and that is Professor Karel deLeeuw. Anything we present on him is through the lens of his killer or the media who covered the case. So if anyone out there knows this victim personally and could tell us a bit more about him, please go ahead and send us a message. Okay, before we get to today's discussion, let's orient ourselves with a little background on Stanford University. As we learned last season, Stanford University was founded by California Senator Leland Stanford and his wife Jane in 1885. And they did this as a memorial to their son who died at the age of 15 and was never able to attend college. Their goal was to create a private liberal arts university that would be affordable to all of the young people of California. To learn more about Stanford's tumultuous beginnings, we invite you to listen to episode 38, which was Jane Stanford Part 1. As the university grew, so did its influence, as many graduates of the school went on to include renowned inventors, politicians, and researchers who would later pave the way for innovation and discovery. Much of the digital, tech, and biological breakthroughs that we rely on today began in Stanford labs. We're talking about computer time sharing, the first isolation of stem cells, and the first synthesis of biologically active DNA. Not surprisingly, this made Stanford one of the top universities in the United States, with their 2024 ranking as the number 3 university in the nation. Megan, any guess on who beats them out in spot 1 and 2?
Harvard and Yale?
Great guess. So Harvard is tied for number 3, but they were beaten out by
Princeton?
Princeton. Yes. Yep. Princeton and MIT.
MIT, yes. Okay, got it.
Yes. Now, despite this high rating, the founders' original commitment to affordability hasn't changed, as according to Stanford's website, over 85% of their students receive scholarships or other financial aid, and 78% of their undergrads leave the school debt-free. How incredible. I never knew that. Yeah.
I wonder how does that happen? That's incredible. Okay.
That really is. To be such a top school and to also have stats like that, it's really commendable.
Imagine being a student walking out of there, like so accomplished with a great school, and you don't have to start with that great weight on your back. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm impressed.
And
As if Stanford wasn't impressive enough.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
And innovation remains at the top of the school's priority. And while there's no evidence to prove it, perhaps this is what attracted doctoral candidate Ted Streleski to seek out a place in Stanford's graduate department of mathematics in the 1960s. While little is known about his upbringing, Ted Streleski grew up near Carlisle, Illinois, and he was an only child. His parents divorced when he was quite young, and while he was predominantly raised by his mother, he later told the press that they didn't get along very well and that he had a much closer relationship with his dad, but it's not clear how often he actually saw his father.
Mm-hmm.
What we know, though, is that at 19, Ted left home and he never went back. He graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in electrical engineering, and 3 years later, after being rejected by Harvard and MIT, Ted was accepted by Stanford as a graduate student. He would earn his master's degree in electrical engineering in 1963, then he applied to be part of the mathematics doctoral program. However, getting his doctorate proved to be much more difficult than his previous 2 degrees.
As they usually are.
Especially in electrical engineering, I would imagine.
I can't imagine.
Yeah. For starters, Ted found it difficult to find a faculty advisor. And while we don't know the specifics of why, based on later information about his personality, we can surmise that he may have been a difficult student to work with. But still, Ted persisted and spent 5 years working on his dissertation, in which he later claimed he had little help or guidance.
And 5 years is the average, just so people know. Well, 4 to 6 years is really, but 4 is quick.
I didn't say he finished. I said he spent 5 years.
Okay.
But yes.
All right, fair.
Yeah. And you remember you have to have a faculty advisor, and they become like your mentor and your go-to person. That person plays a very important role in your experience.
Very integral in your dissertation.
Mm-hmm. Although he says he didn't have much help or guidance, he seemed to rely on a math professor by the name of Karel deLeeuw. Interestingly, this professor had a similar background to Ted, and perhaps this is why Ted sought him out. deLeeuw was also an Illinois native and had gotten his bachelor's at the University of Illinois, just like Ted did. Karel went on to get his doctorate from Princeton and began teaching at Stanford in 1957, where he was highly regarded in his field and beloved by his students. He was known by many as an innovative mathematician and an imaginative teacher. He would spend his sabbaticals at Churchill College, Cambridge, where he was a Fulbright scholar. Pretty impressive.
Oh, wow.
For listeners who may not know, being a Fulbright scholar or a Fulbright fellow is highly regarded, and it's a coveted title in the academic world. Basically, it allows academics to travel to other universities on scholarships to perform research. And in fact, the Fulbright program is the most prestigious international academic exchange program in the world. So this really showed how much of an asset Professor deLeeuw was to his field.
How cool. You would have loved that, traveling to other countries.
I don't think that I would have been competitive enough of an applicant to get a Fulbright scholar.
I think you would have been.
Oh,
that would be my worst nightmare, having to get on a plane and travel for research.
Oh my God, I would love that. Okay.
I know.
And Professor deLeeuw was not only successful in his career, but he had a close, loving family in his wife and 3 children. While it's unclear when exactly he agreed to be Ted's thesis advisor, what became abundantly clear very quickly was that these two did not see eye to eye at all. Now, I couldn't find anything to corroborate this, but according to Ted, Professor deLeeuw told him that he would have to quit his part-time job to pursue his doctorate full-time, But this was difficult for Ted, who says he had no other income. It was alleged that this was the school's policy at the time. Now, I had trouble finding out whether this was true or not, but it is possible that it had something to do with scholarship or grant money. I don't know if you recall, but while you're getting your PhD, there are certain restrictions as far as other outside work that you can have, at least on the books.
I do recall. We were paid a stipend and we did some work for the school, but yeah, there were restrictions on it, which is why you're always broke.
Or why you nanny and get money under the table, like I did.
Exactly.
So this upset Ted because, again, he was strapped for cash and he wanted to be able to work. Ted also claimed that Professor deLeeuw was verbally curt with him whenever he would ask questions and would sometimes make fun of his clothing, particularly his shoes on several occasions. At one point, he says the two got into a heated argument where Ted claimed that the professor got so mad that he spit in Ted's face as he yelled. Now, while these things were perceived by Ted...
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. He's not really spitting in his face. It's just like it got heated, so spit was coming out. Okay, gotcha.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, okay.
Now, while these things were perceived by Ted as being unhelpful and probably inappropriate, like I said, we don't know the other side of the story. So we can't really put too much stock in this. But based on how well liked deLeeuw was by many other students, perhaps he and Ted just had a personality clash or personal differences.
Right.
It's also quite possible that Ted misconstrued some of the comments or wasn't following instructions to the point that his advisor became fed up with him. But regardless, Ted found this mentorship distressing, and as a result, he stopped his studies and left Stanford in 1967.
Wow, okay. I mean,
now I
also realize I don't know about your cohort, but half of my cohort finished, and or maybe, I'm sorry, 7 of us out of 12. 5 didn't finish.
I'm pretty sure the numbers were similar in mine. And
yeah,
being in a PhD program, you can see why. It's very taxing. You don't have money. You're working hard. And a lot of people, especially people who got married or had children, they would leave because they simply just couldn't afford to pursue the degree anymore. Now, I did find one resource that said Ted had actually submitted a thesis during this time, and he was told to flesh it out and resubmit, but it doesn't seem like he ever did. So he left and left with an incomplete on his project as well.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
During his break from academia, Ted met and married a woman named Marilee Merwin, who was an airline stewardess, and the two started building a life together. But Ted wasn't ready to give up on his doctorate. So despite the couple struggling financially, he went back to Stanford in 1968 to try to continue down the path of getting his doctorate. However, by 1970, he had made little progress, and he and Marilee were almost destitute. So Ted made a formal complaint to the dean of the mathematics school about his inability to hold a job while studying and how financially taxing it had become. As a result, the dean awarded him a $2,000 scholarship, which would be around about $19,000 today. He also helped find him a different advisor that would help him with his thesis. So this is pretty nice that the dean would do this to help him.
Very accommodating.
Yes. But the money ran out fairly quickly, as 2 years later, Ted had still not completed his thesis, and he and Marilee were so poor that they qualified for welfare and food stamps.
You have to wonder at this point what he's doing, though.
We're talking
if he had
about
some support.
We're talking about 5 years, and then it looks like there's another 4 years. And yes, while dissertations can take a long time, this does seem at some point that it is being dragged out a bit.
Yes.
And coupled with the financial troubles, Ted alleged that at one point during this low period, Professor deLeeuw saw Ted walking in the halls of the math department and said, "You're still here," which apparently Ted took very badly, later claiming that this particular incident was the tipping point where he realized, quote, "There was a question about me getting my PhD at Stanford." So this is the first time that he's thinking maybe he will not be able to complete this endeavor.
Okay.
And Ted ruminated on this, becoming convinced that Professor deLeeuw and the whole system at Stanford had set him up to fail, as by that point, Ted had been working on his thesis for over a decade.
No, it's not right. Okay.
And by 1973, Ted's anger and belief that there was a conspiracy against him at Stanford heavily affected his mood and behavior. He would often throw things and break things, and he became physically violent and controlling towards his wife. A year later, after Ted's abuse had sent his wife to the hospital on more than one occasion, she had had enough, and she left him in 1974 and filed for divorce. During the same time, Ted went through a series of menial part-time jobs that he couldn't seem to keep, and he was still unable to finish his doctorate. Now, by the time the divorce was finalized in 1978, Ted was unemployed, destitute, and alone. And all of this failure convinced Ted that Stanford, and specifically Professor deLeeuw, had kept him from achieving success and that they needed to pay.
Oh,
You could see, like, we've seen this before. This is just escalating, and it's, the perfect storm when somebody's losing their job, losing their family, and they're just getting angrier and angrier. And I think part of the obsession with Professor deLeeuw was that by this point, he had become the department chair. So he was kind of living the life that Ted thought he should be living. So it seems like he was probably mad about that as well. Maybe he saw himself in this professor.
Or what he couldn't have, yeah.
Yeah, so what he could have been or what he couldn't achieve.
Yeah.
On August 18th, 1978, only 2 days after Merrily signed the last of the divorce documents, Ted Streleski decided to take his revenge on the place that he felt cost him almost 20 years of his life. He arrived on Stanford's campus with a mental list of the people who needed to pay and a small hammer in his pocket. As you might have guessed, Professor Karel deLeeuw was the first name on that list, so Ted went straight to the mathematics building and waited for him to arrive for his office hours. He quietly watched his old advisor go into his office and sit at his desk to begin to grade papers. The professor's back was to the door, and Ted went in quietly, taking the hammer out of his bag. And in his later court testimony, he would describe the murder in the following way, quote, "I walked up directly behind him. I hit him squarely on the top of the head with a hammer, and then administered what I call 2 or 3, quote, insurance blows to the right of the temple. At some point, I heard what I assumed to be the death rattle. I covered him with a clean garbage bag like a shroud to save the feelings of the janitor who would probably find him."
Whoa, that is very cold. Very cold.
Listen to this. Ted then hung a handwritten sign outside of the office door that said office hours were canceled due to a family emergency. He then calmly walked off campus.
Wow. What about the rest of the list, Amy, the other people?
So according to later testimony, this list of others who needed to pay, they were only backup in the event that Professor deLeeuw wasn't on campus or he couldn't find him. So basically, the others, who had also all been advisors as well, would have been the placeholder for his revenge. But his number one target was this one professor.
That is very interesting.
Yes.
That's almost something I've not heard before. Okay, thank you.
After calmly leaving campus, Ted went to Palo Alto, where he had a beer and a slice of pizza before going to a bus stop where he sat and read a novel until 3 in the morning. When he finished the book, he walked down to the Palo Alto police station and turned himself in, handing officers the bloody hammer that he put in a plastic bag as evidence.
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
In a way, this kind of reminds me of the Bayard Peaks case from last season, where he had killed somebody on campus because they wouldn't publish him. And then he kind of just went about his life like nothing ever happened. It's almost like the same level of bizarre narcissism or detachment.
Yeah, I agree. It does remind me of that.
During questioning, Ted readily admitted to police that he was the murderer. And the fact that he came with his own evidence meant that it really didn't take long for police to place him under arrest. And putting together a trial also didn't take very long. They had the evidence, and it was quite clear based on the evidence, and of course they had Ted's confession. Only a year later, in 1979, Ted Streleski was charged with the murder of Professor Karel deLeeuw, and he was put on trial.
You gonna go for like an insanity defense here?
So smart, Reagan. I was just going to say what I find the most interesting here is that while Ted's defense attorney entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, Ted denied that this was true. And he was, in his estimation, completely sane when he murdered his former advisor. And he said he had done it as a political statement against the university and that he believed his actions were, quote, logically and morally correct for how Stanford treated its graduate students. Now, this is delusional.
Okay.
This is absolutely delusional.
I don't know. I mean, maybe he's delusional, or maybe that's...
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe you could argue that he's completely sane, that he completely formed. This is his logic, and, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
He also later explained that his killing of his old advisor was his way of publicly bad-mouthing Stanford as impactfully as possible. And he was very outspoken. He spoke to the media a lot. After the trial, he told the press, quote, "There are other students who have encountered the treatment that I did, but who has ever heard of them? The publicity has been used as a weapon against Stanford. I think I got out of the murder what I wanted.
We'll return after a brief word from our sponsors. You're going to tell us what happened with the trial, right?
Oh, yeah. I will.
Okay.
But I just want to give you a little more of an insight into his mental state. Later, he would also go into a deeper explanation to People magazine where he said, quote, I considered other alternatives. I considered going to the alumni or to the students. I thought about trashing the place. I considered going to the media directly, but I realized that I had no leverage. Television and the media don't cover struggling graduate students, but they do cover murderers.
Okay. There it is.
So, I mean, he clearly this was very premeditated and I guess you would say utilitarian, right? Like he had very rational, right? He had a clear goal in mind when he was doing this.
He certainly did. This also strikes me as someone who just can't, it's like, I hate to geek out on our theory, but it's someone like strain theory who cannot achieve success in the traditional way. Mm-hmm. So instead, he's decided that fame is going to be his measure of success and how he's going to be known. He will be known for something.
Mm-hmm. And if you recall, his lawyer wanted him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but Ted would not have that, forcing his lawyer to put in a not guilty plea. So the defense focused their case around Ted's financial stresses, the breakup of his marriage, the professor's hurtful comments, and just the general grueling mental headspace of having been denied a doctorate for almost 20 years.
I mean, that's not really a defense, though. Those are
don't
mitigating
think so.
factors, but it's not like self-defense. I mean, it doesn't,
They did have a defense psychiatrist who diagnosed him with paranoid psychosis. So essentially, this is similar to schizophrenia, but where schizophrenia is a permanent condition, psychosis is classified as a temporary disorder that could be brought on by environmental factors or outside stimuli, sometimes intense amounts of stress that basically cause a person to believe in paranoid delusions. And I think we see a lot of proof of that here.
But that would exactly qualify him for an insanity defense. So it doesn't make sense if it's not.
It almost sounds like they were just looking to get diminished capacity. Yeah. And actually, and after several days of trial, he was convicted of second-degree murder because of reasons of diminished capacity. Which clearly this was not second-degree murder based on the evidence. No. Okay, so this next part might surprise you, but how long do you think he was sentenced for in the second-degree murder verdict?
This was in the 1970s?
Mm-hmm.
Or like early 1980s? And it's
early 80s. Yep.
10 years.
Okay, so 7 years, which is incredibly short for this type of crime. But there are so many questions here. Of course, one of the main questions is why was his sentence so short? So I definitely want to talk about, how do we feel about the diminished capacity verdict? Based on what we know, do we even believe in diminished capacity? Are there other ways that this crime could have been explained? I think so. Okay, so let's talk about why 7 years first.
Okay.
Well, in 1978, California had a law on the books that anyone convicted with diminished capacity could only serve a max of 8 years in prison. So this was a statutory limitation.
Got it.
But what's even more interesting is that 4 days after Ted's sentencing, that law was abolished. How ironic is that?
Oh, you're
4
kidding
days. Me. No.
Whoa.
Now, it's unclear if the law was already set to be abolished. I would imagine it would be because these things take these things take time. So I'm wondering if Ted managed to get his sentencing in before the actual ruling, or maybe Ted's very public case caused enough outcry that the law was quickly changed. I'm not sure which one.
Wow. Okay.
But what we do know is that if Ted was tried for the same case today in California, he most likely would have received a life sentence. That is a huge discrepancy.
Sure is.
While in prison, Ted refused to undergo any psychological treatment, continuing to deny that he was insane or even at a diminished capacity. And he cited that attending any type of treatment would imply that he had remorse for what he had done. And he says he simply did not feel any remorse at all for the murder. He also claimed that showing any kind of remorse would cheapen the political statement against Stanford. And again, he says that's why he murdered the professor.
What's the political statement that he's trying to make?
It seems like it has something to do...
Students aren't treated right.
Yeah, it has something to do with the way in which doctoral students were being treated and the fact that they weren't allowed to work during pursuing their degree.
Right, okay.
I don't even know how that's a political statement, right? It's like an institutional
I don't know either,
statement.
okay.
Yeah. I don't think he'll be surprised to know that he was denied parole 3 times because part of the parole agreement was that he would have to go to therapy, right? And also they said part of the parole agreement was that he would have to stay away from Stanford University. And he would not agree to that term either.
What do
and
you
of course,
mean?
so they said in order for him to be granted early release on parole, he would have to, number 1, agree to therapy, number 2, agree to stay away from Stanford University, and number 3, show remorse, likely. Right? And he wouldn't do any of them.
I don't understand. How do you mean he wouldn't stay away from Stanford? And I would think that it wouldn't even be part of parole. I would think that he would just have a permanent restraining order where he could never enter the premises. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. Okay, go ahead.
So he would end up serving his full sentence of, again, just 7 years.
7 years.
So in 1985, he was released at the age of 49. And he was released with no parole restrictions. He maxed out as a free man.
Terrifying.
And he pretty much kept to himself. The last account available was an interview he did with People magazine upon his release in September of 1985. Here he claimed, quote, "I have no intention of killing again. I killed for notoriety. If I kill again, it weakens my argument. On the other hand, I cannot predict the future." How chilling is that?
Chilling, absolutely. Actually, I was afraid I was afraid you were going to say that he committed some other crime, but yeah, I killed for notoriety. I think
And
that's what it really was. Wow.
Yeah. But he does say he cannot predict the future. But as of 1986, he was living in San Francisco Bay area trying to get a job as an electrical engineer. But other than that, there's nothing publicly available about his life. And since his name never came up again, we can only hope that he turned out to be a productive and law-abiding citizen. Although I'm thinking maybe he just changed his name.
I was thinking the same thing. Okay.
Yeah. But while Ted was released with seemingly few, if any, consequences, what impact did this have on Professor deLeeuw's family and also the greater Stanford community? I'm sure, as you could imagine, it wasn't that easy for everyone else.
No.
For one, the deLeeuw family was extremely distressed with the outcome of the trial, since while they technically won and got the full level of the law as sentencing, it still meant that the man who murdered their husband and father would be released back into the world in less than a decade. As a lead prosecutor on the case told People magazine, quote, "The problem was with the law, not the verdict. The law we had then was an unconscionable expression of an inept legislation process. It was a scandal." And I think this bears repeating here that it wasn't the verdict, right? The jury's hands were tied here because the law said they could not go above that maximum.
Well, but their verdict was he was charged with first-degree murder, and their verdict was second-degree murder.
Yes, because of the diminished capacity. That is correct.
Okay.
But even
yes, I understand.
Even so, second-degree murder, today, second-degree murder would get a much stiffer sentence than 10 years. Remember, the law at the time tied their hands. And on top of feeling failed by the justice system, the deLeeuw family felt further betrayed by the press. As the victim's wife, Sita, told the Los Angeles Times after Ted's release, quote, "All the horror of my husband's death came back to haunt me, not because his killer had been released, but because the media has turned him into a celebrity and permitted him to give his version of my husband's death unchallenged." She went on to explain that while she had been interviewed by multiple media outlets about her husband, his work at the university, and how his students perceived him, which, by the way, was all good. Everyone described him as a kind and compassionate man who was always ready to talk about issues and even sometimes brought the students lunch and dinner. When these articles came out, all of that information was left out. Every inch of print space had been given to his murderer. Not something we haven't seen before, unfortunately.
And just something we were talking about the other day when we were recording for Women in Crime, how the names of, the killers are always the ones that are remembered and celebrated in the media. And I don't mean celebrated like that, but, that the victims' names get lost.
The victim's wife said she even had to watch her husband's murderer talk about killing him on several national television stations in which he aired all of his grievances and smeared the professor's character to millions of people in justification for the murder. In Sita's estimation, the media had played right into Ted Streleski's ego. He had killed her husband for his own notoriety, and the media not only gave him a front-page news articles, but a whole platform that he, at least emotionally or psychologically, benefited from at the expense of the deLeeuw family. And in the end, Sita was far more angry at the media than she was even at the murderer.
Interesting.
As she told the LA Times, quote, "My husband is dead. My children are without a father because a man wanted to, quote, make a point about Stanford University. We have tried to put our lives together, but I am still frustrated, angry, and most of all sad. She challenged the press to do better, stating, quote, "The media has an obligation not to pander to people's basset instincts and to be fair, even at the expense of sensationalism."
Okay, so what did Stanford do? First of all, did they take a public position, and did they change any policy? What's the outcome here?
That's a good question. According to CETA, school officials stayed away from the press upon Ted's release. Basically, they were refusing to rehash whether he had been unfairly treated in his department. Essentially, they remained silent on all matters surrounding Ted, which isn't uncommon to see, and I'm sure the school wanted to do everything it could to mitigate any bad press.
Yeah.
However, while they did not speak much about the murderer, several faculty from the mathematics department wrote into the press expressing their concern about Ted's 1985 release. In fact, immediately upon learning of his release, the whole department sat down with Stanford's public affairs and public safety officers to devise a plan of action if Ted were to come back onto campus.
Yeah.
And public notice was made to Ted that he was banned from campus, and should he come to campus, he would be immediately arrested for trespassing.
Exactly.
And as far as I could find, he never stepped foot back on Stanford's campus, nor did he try to finish pursuing his doctorate degree.
Oh, I was going to ask that. Okay.
Yeah. But Stanford did do right by Professor Karel deLeeuw by setting up a lecture series in his honor, and that series is still going strong today. It's called the deLeeuw Distinguished Lectures, where experts from around the world are invited to speak to general audiences on different mathematical theories and ideas, as lecturing and researching through the Fulbright program was one of the professor's favorite things.
Well, that's very nice. I'm glad to hear that they did that.
As we mentioned before, if this case was tried today, I think there would be a very different outcome. And I'd hedge to say that the media storm would have also played out pretty differently, and I think there would have been more attention to the victim's family and to paying respect to the victim. I don't think that Ted Streleski would have been given the platform that he had hoped for. And while none of this will ever bring Karel deLeeuw back, I do think that relooking at older cases like this does show us that we have come a little bit far. We have a long way to go with criminal justice system reform, but I think at least these kinds of cases show us that things have gotten a little better.
What do you mean though? Like, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. I think a killer still gets the same platform. I think that the media still sensationalizes infamous killers and crimes. While maybe they're treated, maybe the difference is how we look at them, and we do view them, I don't know, more in the light of criminal and offender versus it seems like they were maybe lenient on him, like giving him a platform to voice his own dismay. I'm not really sure, but I would argue that the media would still give him the same type of attention that they gave him then.
So I think we would see two differences. Today, I think his sentence would have been much longer. And
yes,
while I do agree that some media would have given him platforms, I do think that there's enough alternative media today that would have taken the other perspective and focused more on the victim, whether that be podcasts or documentaries, right?
Yep.
We're seeing a lot more focus paid to both sides today than I think we used to.
Okay, that's fair. And yes, that's probably true, Amy.
Yeah. Again, I want to thank Linda A. for sending us this thought-provoking case. And again, if you have a campus case that you would like us to cover, please send us a message on our website. We absolutely love getting your case suggestions. Before we go today, if you'd like to support Campus Killings, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts.
Your subscription will get you VIP access to all the shows on the network that not only includes hundreds of episodes of ad-free listening, but also bonus content and early access to episodes.
For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting this show in the process.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and search for either Campus Killings or AbJack, and you can start your subscription with a free trial.
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of Campus Killings.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Megan Sachs and Dr. Amy Schlossberg, with research and writing by Abigail Belcastro. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings or on Facebook at facebook.com/Campus Killings. You can also visit the show's homepage at campuskillings.com. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.